All right, let's dive in. We're going to be talking about one of the most important stories in the world right now, India's massive, and I mean massive, effort to tackle climate change. But here's the twist. It's doing this while also trying to lift hundreds of millions of people into a better life. It's a true balancing act. So today, we're going to break down the plan, the progress, and what it all means for the rest of us. Okay, I want to start with just one number, 7.93%. What is that? Well, that's how much India's total greenhouse gas emissions dropped in 2020 compared to the year before. Now, it's a fascinating statistic, but it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. And to really get why numbers like this matter so much, we have to quickly go back to the basic problem everyone on the planet is trying to solve. And this right here is the heart of it, the greenhouse effect. It's actually pretty simple, right? Gases in the atmosphere basically act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping the sun's heat. A little bit is good, but too much, and things start to get way too warm. This is the fundamental science that's driving this huge global push to cut emissions. It's why every country's climate plan is being looked at under a microscope. So how do we actually keep track of what countries are doing? How do we grade their performance on this huge global stage? Well, you can think of it like a climate report card, one that's based on promises and commitments that everyone has agreed to. And the foundation for that report card is something with a bit of a jargony name, Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs for short. Basically, just think of these as the official homework assignments. They are the public action plans that each country submits under the Paris Agreement, where they say to the entire world, okay, here's exactly how we're going to reduce our emissions. And, this whole system didn't just appear out of nowhere. The groundwork really started way back in 1994. But the real game changer, the moment everyone remembers, was the 2015 Paris Agreement. That's when we finally got global temperature goals set in stone. And from there, you can see the timeline accelerate, with India making its own landmark pledge in 2021 to hit net zero by 2070, and continuing to report on its progress right up to this year. So with that global backdrop, let's zoom in. What are India's specific promises? What does the country actually put on the table for the world to see? Well, the government frames its entire approach as being rooted in a deeper national philosophy, one that's inspired by ideas of sustainable development, of living in harmony with nature. This quote here really sets the stage for the country's official targets. And this is super interesting because it breaks down India's first big set of promises from 2016 into 4 clear goals. First, to lower its emissions intensity. That just means making more economic growth with less pollution. Second, a huge push to get 40% of its electricity from non-fossil fuels. Third, a really ambitious plan to grow more forests to act as a giant carbon sink. And finally, to make sure things like farming and water supplies are better prepared for a changing climate. So, those are the pledges. That's the what. But what about the how? How is India actually trying to turn these big goals into real action on the ground? Let's get into the plan. Before you make a plan, you have to know what you're up against. And this chart, wow, it makes it crystal clear. Just look at that huge slice for energy. Over 75%. 3/4 of all of India's greenhouse gas emissions come from the energy sector. That right there is the giant that has to be tackled. This one chart pretty much shapes the entire national strategy. And so here is that strategy, a really comprehensive 7-point plan for the long haul. And you can see it's not just about one thing, it's the whole shebang. It's about reinventing the electricity grid, changing how people get around, rethinking how cities are built, and how industries operate. It even includes things like growing forests and, the really tricky part, figuring out how to pay for all of this. So, let's look at some of these actions on the ground. A huge focus is on reforestation. You've got these programs like the Green Credit Program, which are designed to give people real incentives to plant trees and restore forests. The goal is to essentially turn huge swaths of land into giant sponges that soak up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Then you've got the cities. With rapid urbanization, the push is for sustainable development. So initiatives like the Smart Cities mission are working to completely redesign urban spaces. We're talking better public transport, smarter energy grids, and way more green spaces. It's about fundamentally changing how millions of people live and work. And of course, there's the huge challenge of cleaner air. To tackle that, you have things like the National Clean Air Program, which is rolling out city-specific plans. And that's being combined with a massive national shift to cleaner fuels for cars and much stricter emission standards. The idea is to attack the problem from all sides. Now, this one's really cool.
India has these vast coastlines that are super vulnerable. The Mishti program is all about protecting and restoring mangrove forests. You can see how these incredible ecosystems work. They act as natural shields, protecting coastal towns and villages from storms and erosion. And, none of this works without some real teeth. Underpinning all of this action is a pretty robust legal framework. Laws like the Coastal Regulation Zone Notifications and the Wildlife Protection Act, these are the rules that provide the regulatory backbone for all these environmental efforts. All right, so that's the plan. Lots of initiatives, lots of big ideas. But is any of it actually working? What do the results say? Let's check out that progress report. And the progress is actually pretty remarkable. Remember that emissions intensity goal we talked about? India has already slashed it by 35%, hitting its target way ahead of schedule. The amount of electricity coming from non-fossil fuels, it's shot up to over 46%. And the country's forest and tree cover has grown to cover over a quarter of its land area. These aren't just numbers on a page, they're real, tangible achievements. Okay, so this brings us to the very heart of the matter, the ultimate challenge, the central theme of India's story. How do you grow your economy and lift people up, while also building a green, sustainable future? And this slide, right here, says it all. Just look at this comparison. India is home to about 17% of all the people on Earth, but it's responsible for only 4% of all the emissions that have been pumped into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution began. This single fact is the cornerstone of the argument for what's called climate equity, this idea that the responsibility for fixing the problem needs to be shared fairly. And it's so important to remember the context here. You've got this massive population with huge developmental needs. The amount of energy the average person uses is still just a tiny fraction of the global average. And at the same time, because of its geography, the country is incredibly vulnerable to floods, droughts, and heat waves. This really complex reality is what shapes every single policy decision, which leaves us with this final, powerful question. India is trying to do something really hard, forge a new path to development, one that avoids the carbon-heavy mistakes of the past. If it can pull it off, if this ambitious balancing act actually works, could it become the playbook for a sustainable future for the rest of the developing world? That right there is the billion-person question. Thanks for joining.